Good morning, friends. You are mostly welcome in this lecture series on English literature. We are going to continue for UGC exam here. Today, we will talk about number 7 cultural studies. So at the beginning, firstly, we will discuss that what is culture. Talking about culture, culture is an umbrella term. The word culture derives from cultura, Cultura, means cultivate, to honor, to protect. Culture is the mode of generating meanings and ideas. These meanings are generated by society. It encompasses the social behavior, institutions, and norms found in human societies. Culture is originated from or attributed to a specific region or location. Human acquire culture through the learning processes. Culture norm codifies acceptable conduct in society. Uh, Serves as a guideline for behavior, race, language. Culture considered central concept in anthropology, but it also related to literature. It is a modern term. It is based on term used by the ancient Roman orator Cicero. Culture, important term, base term for the cultures. That's why culture is nothing but what we see, behave, present, understand, decipher among the people living with them. Why can here define culture that culture is a social domain that emphasizes practices, discourses, and material expressions which express the continuities and discontinuities of social meaning of a life held in common. Cambridge English Dictionary defines the culture that culture is the way of life of a particular group of people, a particular word culture used in general sense as the evolved ability to categorize and represent experiences. That's why culture is important term. There are some other terms related with culture, such as high culture, low culture, public culture, mass culture, rock culture, black dish culture, gay culture, colonial culture, post colonial culture, popular culture, global culture, style culture, cyber culture, postmodern culture, youth culture, monoculture, folk culture, mall culture, power culture. These are various types or kinds of, but speaking about some culture, little first one, that is a high culture. High culture is a subculture. It emphasizes the cultural objects of aesthetic value. High culture identifies the culture of an upper class or upper strata. It identifies society's common repository of broad range knowledge, tradition. After that, there is a term low culture. Low culture is a derogatory term. It deals with low level personality. It is a totally contrast to high culture. It can be also derogatory. That's why low culture standards a class. That class is nothing. Class of unstableness, high to low. There is another kind of culture, that is subculture. Subculture is a group of people within a culture. It differentiates itself from the parent culture. Subculture develops their own values. Norms and values deals with cultural, political, and sexual matters. Subculture is part of society. Concept of subculture was developed sociology and cultural study. Culture is different than counterculture. For dictionary, a subculture is an identifiable subgroup within a society or group of people. After that, the counterculture. Counterculture is a culture whose values, norms of behavior differ from those of mainstream society. Counterculture the ethos and aspirations of specific population during a well-defined era. In popular culture. Popular culture is a culture of masses and their tastes. In 1969, Department of Popular Culture at Bowling Green University in USA launched the Journal of Popular Culture, which carried essays on Spider-Man comics, rock music, amusement parks, detective films. Popular culture is the set of beliefs, values, and practices that are widely shared. So, popular culture is also important term related culture studies. But there must become a question in our mind: how is their production and consumption of culture? Actually, culture has aspects such as economic aspect, spatial aspect, erotic aspects, ideological aspect, political aspect. It is not natural but produce. Culture is not natural but produce. That's why production and consumption of culture links matters of class, economy, and representation, power and identity. Culture is product which is made, marketed, and consumed. That's why there is a power and cultures link mass created practices and legitimated values. Cultural issues and themes are mediated through questions of economy means profit and politics means power. That's why culture plays vital role. But here we will go ahead to discuss about the cultural studies. And cultural studies is most important term and recent term in literature, because it has special place in literature. Cultural studies is a special stream related with literature. Here we discuss about the nature and cultural studies, the definitions of cultural studies. At the beginning, talking about cultural studies, cultural study is the prominent term, the prominent stream in recent literature. In simple words, we can define cultural studies that cultural studies is an attempt to examine the impact of art and culture on the lives and minds of individuals. Cultural studies emerged as an academic discipline that lays emphasis on the critical analysis of how an art, how literature and art are produced, how literature and art served a particular interest of the capitalist class. Cultural studies influences our ways of looking and perceiving the world which is existed around us. Every art, advertisement, literature, newspaper, music, and magazine is loaded with some or other sort of economic and political ideology. Cultural studies seeks to understand the social construct around art, literature, and entertainment. It is important term. In the words of entertainment and art are highly politically charged. Television, advertisements, and popular magazines are the objectives of analysis in the new field of cultural criticism. Why cultural study is important? It is only through art and culture that a certain kind of ideology is propagated, and this ideology is also imposed on people. Films and television serve the ready made images of a man, a woman, a hero, a villain, and attributes. Films and televisions, films and advertisements plays vital role. This role strengthens. This role strengthens to patriarchy. There are so many various writers who studied about cultural studies, such as Richard Hogarth, Raymond Williams, E.P. Thompson, Walter Benjamin, Antonio Gramsci, and John Fiske. These are theorists. They scrutinize culture through Marxist socialist point of view. So here now there are some definitions related with culture study. Stuart Hall says cultural studies is an approach to studying culture that lies at the intersection between the social sciences, most notably sociology, and the humanities. Toby Miller says cultural studies is magnetic. It accretes various tendencies that are splintering the human sciences, such as Marxism, feminism, queer theory, postcolonial theory. That's why Raymond Williams and Richard Hogarth called the father of cultural studies. Richard Johnson says cultural studies is now a movement or a network. It has its own degrees in several colleges and universities. It exercises a large influence on academic disciplines, especially English studies, sociology, media, communication studies, linguistics, and history. That's why, dear students, culture study important stream in culture. So ahead we will continue talking about the background of cultural studies. At the beginning, we will discuss little bit nature of social studies. That cultural studies is an interdisciplinary field. It examines the political dynamics of contemporary culture. It researchers, it studies the researchers' thinking, investigates how culture practices. That's why it is very important. Employing cultural analysis, cultural studies views cultures not as fixed, bounded, stable, and discrete entities, but it views as constantly interacting and changing sets of practices and processes. Cultural studies encompasses a range of theoretical and methodological perspectives of practices. It studies that how culture practices relating to wider systems of power operating through social phenomena. Cultural studies views culture as interacting and changing sets of practices and processes. Cultural studies developed by British Marxists in 1950s, 1970s. Cultural studies is uh, interdisciplinary and antidisciplinary term. It gains to understand how meaning is generated, disseminated, contested, bound up with systems of power and control. Cultural studies produce from the social, political, and economic spheres within a particular social formation. It influenced on cultural hegemony and combines a variety of politically engaged critical approaches such as semiotics, Marxism, feminist theory, ethnography, post structuralism, post colonialism, social theory, political theory, history, philosophy, history theory, media theory, film studios, video studios, communication studies, political economy, translation studies, museum studies, art history. It is became a global movement. It is attracted the attention of many conservative opponents that characteristic of culture. The objective or aim of culture is to examine cultural practices and their relation to power. The aim of cultural studies is to understand culture in all its forms and analyzing the social and political context in which culture manifests itself. Cultural studies is a site of both study and analysis. It is also site of both political criticism and action. It attempts to expose and reconcile constructed divisions of knowledge. It is an ethical evaluation of modern society. That's why cultural studies is become important discipline present era. It combines political economy, communication, sociology, social theory, film studies, cultural anthropology, philosophy, art, history, criticism. Shows that how a particular phenomenon relates matter of ideology, nationality, ethnicity, social class, and gender. In it, representation is a key concept. It denotes a language in which all objects and relationships define. Language relates to issues of class, power, and ideology. It involves the conjunction of science, the making of meaning from science, and the knowledge of meaning. In it, meanings are hybridized and contested. Culture studies shows everyday life. It defines identity. It influences social relations. It bestows meaning value to artifacts in a culture. So here we must try to understand the culture, study of culture. There is the CCCS, Center for Contemporary Culture Studies. It is a research center at University of Birmingham, England. It was founded in 1964 by Richard Hogarth. Richard Hogarth was the first director. There was a development of culture studies by this CCCS between 1964 to 2002. Richard Hogarth departed it in 1968. In 1968, Stuart Hall started to handle. He was the second director. CCCS is also called Birmingham School of Culture Studies. Its approaches to study culture are ideological analysis, studies of working class cultures, subcultures, the role of media audiences, feminist cultural research, hegemonic struggles, the place of race in social and cultural processes. There are notable works related with this CCCS, such as Op Center, Feminism and Cultural Studies, Resistance Through Rituals, The Empire Strikes Back, Border Patrols, Politicizing the Boundaries of Heterosexuality. Richard Johnson, Stuart Hall, and Michael Green created an archive of CCCS related material at the Cadbury Research Library at Birmingham. There is a Stuart Hall seminal, which title is Encoding and Decoding Model of Communication. Collective research is politicizing the crisis. David Morley and Charlotte Brunson pioneered the center's approach to empirical research in the nationwide project. Richard Johnson is the third director of CCCS, and he researched in social and cultural history. There is the staff of this center, such as Maureen McNeil, who was a theorist of culture and science. Michael Green was the belongs to media, culture policies, and regional cultures in the Midlands, and Gray relates to culture and media. Graduates and associates of the Center for Contemporary Culture Studies and the Department of Culture Studies. Here we find the members such as Paul Gilroy, Angela McRobbie, Dick Hebdige, after that Richard Dyer, Michael Denning, Lawrence Grosberg, Ian Chambers, Gregor Melnan, Lucy Bland, Frank Webster, George Loren, Sadie Plant, Bill Chavarge, Dorothy Hobson, Hazel Carby, Paul Willis, Rosalind Brunt, Tony Jeffersons. It closed in 2002. The reason is an unexpectedly low result in the UK research assessment exercise of Joule. University retained staff members and the students transferred to other departments. It denied high culture and accepted popular culture. Its work was characterized by a radical, new left influenced, anti elitist approach to culture and ideology, focusing on subcultures, the media, and the state. The members are Marxist. It developed Western Marxism. The members are Britain's New Left. Stuart Hall is the first editor in chief of New Left Review during the dark age of Thatcherism. It linked to the canonical Marxist theory of Antony, Antonio, Antonio Gramsci. Antonio Gramsci, he produced the term hegemony. It analyzed class, generation, race, gender conflicts. Paul Gilroy, who belonged to race and post-colonial condition. Angela McRobbie, who studied about gender, fashion, and girls' culture studies has become an umbrella for just about anything. It is also British culture. Hogarth appointed Stuart Hall as his assistant. Culture studies and sociology, 1919. The members of CCCS lead British culture studies. They explore relation between cultural forms and political economy. Marxist terms, base and superstructure, influence on Birmingham School. The workers or the works of British culture studies presented by Richard Hogarth, P. Thompson, R. Williams, Stuart Hall, Paul Willis, Angela McRobbie, Paul Gilroy, David Morley, Charlotte Wisnon, Chad Dyer, etc. etc. So, talking about the British culture studies, Dennis Workin writes that critical movement in the beginning of culture studies as a field was when Richard Hogarth used a term in 1964. The center would become home to the development of the intellectual orientation that has become known internationally as the Birmingham School of Culture Study. So, this Birmingham School presented artistically. Here, Culture study developed in Britain as a reaction against liberal humanism and orthodox Marxism. It is was against as an engagement with new left in the 1950s. So Stuart's Hall directorship of CCCS at Birmingham was an important one. So firstly, Richard Hogarth, after that Stuart Hall. Talking about Richard Hogarth, he was emphasized on British popular culture. He studied in English literature, sociology. His first book is W.H. Auden's poetry. Hogarth's the work, the uses of literacy is important. The uses of literacy is partly autobiography. The volume was interpreted as lamenting the loss of an authentic working class popular culture through advertising, media, and Americanization. Richard Hogarth was the professor of English at Birmingham Unit between 1962 73. Hogarth was the first director and founder of CCCS. He was lifelong member of Labour Party. He taught in different universities such as Hull University, Leicester University, and Birmingham University. Hogarth was examined popular entertainment within an overriding framework of family, community, social practices, and language patterns. He was influenced by T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Dylan Thomas, Cecil D. Lewis, Stephen Spender, and Louis Mackniss. He belonged to a working class background family. Hogarth tried to privilege the organic working class culture over mass culture. Hogarth discussed the changes that happen to working class culture with the advent of capitalism. There is some works which about we must talk or we must discuss. First one is the uses of literacy. Its full title is The Uses of Literacy Aspects of Working Class Life, which appeared in 1957. The Uses of Literacy is a groundbreaking study of working class culture. It is a critical appraisal of the changes brought by the commercial forces. In it, Hogarth applied the tools of the literary critic of high culture to embark upon a comprehensive analysis. There, he uh, he introduced the society which is called the felt quality of life or a field of value. The uses of literacy examines the influence of mass media to the UK. It is a key figure, it is a key influence in the history of English and media studies. It is an attempt to understand the changes in culture in Britain. It is an attempt to understand the changes in culture in Britain caused by massification. It is in two parts. It is written in two parts. First one, a reading of the dense working class life, and second, a wide ranging critique of the post war commercial culture beginning to take root and interface with the culture. Its original title is The Abuse of Literacy. Its subtitle is Aspects of Working Class of Life, with special reference to publications and entertainments. The work uses of literacy, that's why very important. The next writer in British cultural studies is E.P. Thompson. His lifetime is between 1924 to 1993. Thompson was a British historian. He was a New Left scholar. There is his famous work such as The Making of the English Working Class. It is Thompson's massive book. It talks about on the development of the working class in the 18th and 19th centuries. It is first systematic history of the working class. It defines class as a relationship. It studied documents of their lives and opinions such as court records, folk arts, songs, ballads. The documents are very different from what historians looked at in those times. It studies the development of working class consciousness. Here is the next writer related with British culture studies whose name is Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams' full name is Raymond Henry Williams. He was Welsh Marxist, theorist, novelist, and critic. He was influenced by New Left. His writings on politics, culture, the mass media, and literature made a significant contribution to the Marxist critique of culture and the arts. He was studied in culture studies and cultural materialistic approach. He was influenced by Karl Marx, Antonio Gramsci, and Louis Althusser. He was influenced on Terry Galton and Edward Said. Raymond Williams was studied especially Western philosophy and he belongs to Western Marxism. There are some notable ideas created by or deals by Raymond Williams, such as cultural materialism, mobile privatization. In 1946, Raymond Williams founded a journal which title is Politics and Letters. It was inspired by T.S. Eliot's 1948 publication Notes Towards the Definition of Culture. Williams began exploring the concept of culture. Williams says that the concept emerged with the Industrial Revolution in the essay The Idea of Culture. His writings were taken up by New Left. He, he was book reviewer of Manchester Guardian. He was interested in language, literature, and society. Marxism and literature was a response to structuralism. Culture develops an argument about cultural society. 60 significant words of vocabulary appeared in culture and society. Notes and short essays on 110 words appeared in keywords. Raymond Williams' book Culture, in which he says that culture is a realized signifying system. Williams defended his visions against technological determinism in technology and cultural form. The book Keywords, a journal of cultural materialism, is committed to developing the tradition of cultural materialism. There is his work, Culture and Society, which appeared in 1958. The Culture and Society explores how the notion of culture developed in the West, especially Great Britain, from the 18th through the 20th centuries. It deals with conventional social and historical thinking about culture. It argues that the notion of culture developed in response to the Industrial Revolution and the social and political changes. Culture and society is against the notion of high culture. In it, Williams asserted that culture is a whole way of life. I- It related the concept culture is ordinary, studies cultural production to understand how forms of communication were instrumental in the function of capitalism. So, in this work, there was the connection of culture and society is shown by Raymond Williams. How culture exists in the society, how culture presents in the society, shown or studied by Raymond Williams. How various types of cultures are existed in the society, that is also given here. There is the next work by Raymond Williams is The Long Revolution, which appeared in 1961. The Long Revolution speaks about the democratic and industrial revolution. In it, he defines culture and the analysis of the importance of the development of cultural studies. The Long Revolution talks about the foundational documents in the cultural analysis. The title Long Revolution indicates cultural revolution. It tells about the growth of the reading public in English speaking culture and in Western culture. The Long Revolution was published by Cato and Windus. Cato, Chato, and Windus, Windus. There he talks about dominant culture, residual culture, emergent culture in the work The Long Revolution. Dominant culture is a visible aspect of our practices. Attitudes. Residual culture influence of old cultural practices. And emergent culture deals with new cultural practices. The emergent cultural practices are created in modern culture. Counterculture challenges dominant culture. That's why the text long revolution become important. There is other major work by Raymond Williams, such as Television, Technology and Form. In it, Raymond Williams analyzes the history of television, its institutions, programs, practices, and its future prospects. It talks about the importance of technology in shaping the cultural form of television. In it, he resists in it he resists the medium is the message. This is the next work by Williams is Keywords. Its full title is Keywords, a vocabulary of culture and society. Keywords examines the history of more than 100 words that are familiar and yet confusing. In it, he wrote essay on the word culture. It is the collection of essays in which he demonstrates how these keywords take on a new meanings and how these changes reflect the political bent and values of our past and current society. Next work is uh, Resources of Hope, Cultural Democracy. Sources of Hope, Cultural Democracy brings together early writings including Culture is Ordinary, The British Left, Welsh Culture, and What Do I Demonstrate. These are essays. It includes work on such central themes. The themes are nature of a democratic culture, the value of community, green socialism, the nuclear threat, and the relation between the state and the arts. There was another work, communication is there, the country and the city, Marxism and literature. Raymond Williams introduced the term cultural materialism in the work Marxism and Literature. The work understands culture as a productive process. The British counterparts of American New Historicism. Materialism is the method of criticism rooted in Marxism. It stresses the interactions between cultural artifacts and their historical context. Cultural materialism understands culture as a productive process. Why cultural materialism was become important term. Here, Raymond Williams has contributed artistically for the development of culture study. There is the next writer, Stuart Hall. He is also one of the most important personality critique developed British. Stuart Hall's full name is Stuart Macphail Hall. He was a Jamaican born British Marxist socialist, cultural theorist, and political activist. He was founding figure of British cultural studies or Birmingham School Studies. He was known for the founder of New Left Review articulation, encoding decoding model of communication reception theory. Stuart Hall was joined CCS at Birmingham University. He was acting director of CCS in 1968 and he was also director of CCS in 1972. Hall expanded the scope culture studies to deal with race and gender and with helping to incorporate new ideas derived from the work of French theorists like Michel Foucault. He was the president of he was the president of British Sociological Association. He was participated in Black Arts movement. His work covers issues of hegemony and culture studies, taking a post-Gramscian stance. He regards language use as operating within framework of power, institutions, and politics and economics. For Hall, culture was a critical site. For Stuart Hall, culture was a critical site of social action and intervention where power relations are both established and potentially unsettled. Stuart Hall was the proponent of reception theory and developed Hall's theory of encoding decoding. His work of culture studies shows the link between racial prejudice and media. Stuart Hall discussed notions of cultural identity, race, ethnicity, which create the politics of black diasporic identities. Stuart Hall believed that identity to be an ongoing product of history and culture rather than a finished product. He presented his encoding decoding in culture media language. Hall takes a semiotic approach. He builds on the work of Roland Barthes and Umberto Eco. In essay Culture, Identity and Diaspora, Stuart Hall presents two definitions of cultural identity. He says cultural identity is a sort of collective one true self which many people with a shared history and ancestry hold in common. Cultural identity recognizes that as well as the many points of similarity. There are also critical points of deep and significant difference in cultural identity and diaspora. Stuart Hall sheds light on the topic of difference within black identity. There was his model of communication. It laid the foundation of a cultural understanding of communication. There are four stages: first, production; second, circulation; third, use; fourth, reproduction. There are four stages of model of communication: first, production; second, circulation; third, use; fourth, reproduction. So, these model of communication is presented by Stuart Hall. That is his call. There is his work, uh, Culture Studies 1983, a theoretical history. This work is written by Stuart Hall. Culture Studies 1983, a theoretical history, includes 8 lectures delivered at the University of Illinois. It introduced North American audiences to a thinker and discipline that would shift the course of critical scholarship. These lectures presents Hall's original engagements with the theoretical positions that contributed to the formation of cultural studies. In it, he discusses the work of Richard Hogarth, Raymond Williams, and E.P. Thompson. There also we find the influence of structuralism, the limitations and possibilities of Marxist theory, the importance of Althusser and Gramsci. Throughout these theoretical reflections, Hall insists that cultural studies aims to produce the means for political change. There is the next work by Stuart Hall is encoding decoding. It is a part of communication theory and reception. Encoding is the production of a message using verbal and non-verbal symbols. Decoding is the negotiation of the receiver with the text based on his or her knowledge, cultural background, experiences. Decoding can be preferred reading, negotiated reading, or oppositional reading. encoding decoding is the important work by Stuart Hall. There is another work by Stuart Hall, that is Question of Cultural Identity. In it, Stuart Hall firstly outlines the reasons why the question of identity is so compelling and problematic. The cast of outstanding contributors interrogate different dimensions of the crisis of identity. They provide both theoretical and substantive insights into different approaches to understanding identity. There is also another work, Doing Cultural Studies, the story of the Sony Walkman. Doing Culture Study is a title, but it has the full title, Doing Culture Studies, the story of the Sony Walkman. It is a journey between past and present, and it tells about the skills of cultural analysis. It remains the perfect how to for students in media studies, culture studies, design, and sociology. There also we find the cultural representation created by Stuart Hall. The term taken from the book Representation, Cultural Representations, and Signifying Practices, book edited by Stuart Hall. In it, he says culture has a central role in representation. There are multiple shifting meanings to images. However, power structures attempt to fix meanings. These meanings are the form of stereotypes. So, the most important point that Stuart Hall has studied statistically about culture which is presented in the society. So, in this work, so this concept cultural representation, we need to expose stereotype, need to expose stereotype. Talking about British cultures is next is Paul Willis. He is a British scientist. He has contributed to sociology and culture studies. His work emphasizes consumer culture, socialization, music, and popular culture. His work focuses on the ethnographic study of lived cultural forms in a wide variety of contexts. Willis, WILLIS, Willis examines how practices of informal cultural production help to produce and construct cultural worlds from below. His works are Learning to Labor, Preface Culture, The Ethnographic Imagination, Moving Culture, Common Culture. After that, there is a writer, Dick Hebdige. Dick, D-I-C-K, Hebdige, Hebdige. Hebdige is a British media theorist and sociologist. His works deals with subculture and its resistance against the mainstream of society. His three books are: first one, Subculture, The Meaning of Style, and uh, Culture Mix, Culture, Identity, and Caribbean Music. Third, Hiding in the Light on Image and Things. After that, we find in it Hebdige's works on contextual culturalist model of youth culture and consumption. These works on contextual culturalist model of youth culture and consumption. He links the concerns of youth culture, consumption, and the politics of insubordination to debate within aesthetics, semiotics, and post structural. His work, which about we must talk, subculture, the meaning of style by Dick Hebdige. In the work, subculture and the meaning of styles by Hebdige, in it, it focuses on Britain's post-war youth subculture. It also focuses on British post-war youth subculture styles as symbolic forms of resistance. He presents a model of analyzing subcultures. He argues that each subculture undergoes the same trajectory. Hebdige outlines the individual style differences of specific subcultures. Example: teddy boys, mods, rockers, skinheads, punks, punks. Hebdige emphasizes the historical, class, race, socio-economic conditions that surrounded the formation of each subculture. Ahead, talking about next contributor for British culture studies, Richard Dyer. He was worked on film studies, queer theory, experimental animation. His work, White Essays on Race and Culture. The book is White. White examines the reproduction and preservation of whiteness in visual culture from roughly the 15th century to the late 20th century. There is next work by Richard Dyer, that is The Culture of Queers. In this, Dyer unpacks the oversimplified term queer. He argues that it is a sexual identity, not merely about specific sexual activities. Next contributor for British cultural studies is Angela McRobbie. He was a British cultural theorist, feminist. His work combines the study of popular culture, contemporary media practices, and feminism through conceptions of a third person reflexive gaze. He was known for popular culture, youth culture, feminism, media studies, politics. In Aftermath of Feminism, Angela McCraby draws on Foucault to decipher the various technologies of gender which are directed towards young women as subjects of capacity. He was the editor in Journal Cultural Economy, Journal of Consumer Culture, and Communication Review and Culture Unbound. He was written the work Postmodernism and Popular Culture. In this book, Angela, in this book, Angela McCraby uh, says that it engages with postmodernity as a space for social change and political transformation over cultural theory and popular culture. He engages with everyday life as an eclectic and invigorating arena for the interplay of different cultures and identities. He discusses new ways of thinking developed with the advent of postmodernism. She accesses the contribution of key figures in cultural and post imperial theory. Ahead, she argues that throughout for a commitment to culture studies as an undisciplined discipline, reforming and reinventioning itself as a circumstances demand. There is next work by Angela McRibby in the Culture Society. It is a new collection of essays, considers the social consequences of cultural proliferation, and the social basis of aesthetic innovation. In the wake of postmodernism, Macrebi offers a more grounded and even localized account of a key culture practices from the new populism of young British artists, including Damien Hirst, Tracy Emin. Throughout the essay, the author returns to issue of livelihoods and earning a living in the cultural economy, while at the same time praising the issues of cultural values. There is a next work by Angela McCabe, that is Feminism and Youth Culture. Feminism and Youth Culture includes 8 essays on female youth culture. Topics include the changing place of romance in girls' comics and magazines, the everyday culture of working class girls, the appeal of dance narratives for, we can say that, teenage readers and viewers, teenage mothers, and feminist critics of subcultural theory. There is another work by Angela McCabe, The Uses of Culture Studies. The uses of cultural studies talks about 6 cultural theories such as Stuart Hall, Homi Bhabha, Butler Gilroy, Bordy, Jameson. Macrobi intros their works and contribution. There is the next work, The Club Cultures Readers. In it, Macrobi says that it helps to differentiate popular culture studies from some aspects of the theoretical work of contemporary cultural studies. The next contributor for British culture study is Paul Gilroy. He was a British historian, writer, and academic. There was his work There and No Black in the Union Jack. In it, uh, he examines the racial politics of the UK. He discusses in the UK. It is a non-fictional work actually. Ahead, we find there is the influence of British culture study on Louis Althusser, Antonio Gramsci, Roland Barthes, Michael Foucault, Pierre Bourdieu. So, British culture studies really plays a vital role develop develop culture studies. Writers, theorists, the critics belong to British culture is played significant part to develop the culture studies. With that, there were other theorists who also studies, such as Jayauddin Sardar, uh, Clifford Geertz, Paul D. Guy, and Stuart Hall, Jean Baudrillard, Edward Souza. Yes, uh, Paul D. Guy and Stuart Hall belongs to circuit of culture. There were other disciplines related with the cultural studies, uh, such as nation studies. There, you can say that film studies is there, queer theory is there, transgender study also there. So these disciplines also deals with culture studies. After that, globalization studies also belongs to, in it's also relates discipline. So in this way, culture studies is the most important field, especially British culture. Discuss American cultural study. Talking about American culture studies, that in the US, we find in the America, we find the cultural studies was emerged after British cultural studies in America. Yes. And here we find several versions of cultural analysis had emerged largely from pragmatic and liberal pluralist philosophical traditions. However, in the late 1970s and 1980s, yes, in the 1970s and 1980s, the cultural study, the stream of cultural study was, we can say, emerged in America, because when British cultural studies began to spread internationally, we find in 1970 to 1980, the cultural study was expanded tremendously in American universities also, and the culture study was spread in the fields such as communication studies, education, sociology, and literature in America. There is the cultural study which has been based in the America since its founding editor John Fiske, right? In America also, cultural study was played vital role. After that, Latin American cultural studies. In Latin America, cultural studies have drawn on thinkers such as Jose Marti, Angel Rama, and other Latin American figures. Leading Latin American cultural studies scholars include Nestor Garcia Canclini, Jesus Martin Barbero, and Beatriz Sarlo. Among the key issues addressed by Latin American culture studies, scholars are decoloniality, urban cultures, and post development theory. Latin American culture studies journals include the Journal of Latin American Cultural Studies. After that, in Canada also, we find the development of cultural study. It is called Canadian Cultural Studies. In Canada, cultural studies has sometimes focused on issues of technology and society. It continued the emphasis in the work of Marshall McLuhan, Harold Innis, and others. Cultural studies journals based in Canada include Topia, TOPIA. Topia is a journal which belongs to Canadian Journal of Cultural Studies. After that, there is Australia Cultural Studies. Talking about Australia Cultural Studies, from 1970, the cultural studies existed in Australia. Some theorists of culture studies who were practicing in Britain, they emigrated there from the UK. Yes, they brought British culture studies with them. A school of culture studies known as cultural policy studies in Australia. It is one of the distinctive Australian contribution to the field of culture studies. Australia also gave birth to the world's first professional cultural studies association. It is called Cultural Studies Association of Australia. This, this institution was emerged in 1990. There is cultural studies journals based on Australia included International Journal of Cultural Studies Continuum and Cultural Studies Review. These two journals belong to Australian cultural study. There was another culture study, that was French cultural study. It is also played vital role for the development of cultural study. And ahead, there is Asian culture studies, South Asian culture studies, and Inter Asian cultural studies. Both are important. Throughout Asia, cultural studies have boomed. Culture studies thrived since at least the beginning of the 1990s. Culture studies journals based in Asia include Inter Asia Cultural Studies. In India, the Center for Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore, and the Department of Cultural Studies at the English and Foreign Languages and the University of Hyderabad are two major institutional spaces for cultural studies. Through Germany also we find the term cultural studies refers to the field in the Anglosphere. However, the cultural studies used interchangeably by the lay people. After that, we find that uh, in Africa also, human rights and third world issues are among the central topics treated. There is a thriving cultural and media studies scholarship in Southern Africa with its locus in South Africa and Zimbabwe. Sorry. Cultural studies journals based in Africa include the Journal of African Cultures. Okay? Cultural studies developed in various countries. There are some points related with culture studies. We will discuss about it. Some terms are there related with culture studies. Terms related with cultural studies. First one is cultural materialism. Cultural materialism traces to the work of the left wing person Raymond Williams. It makes analysis based on critical theory in the tradition of the Frankfurt School. It emerged with new historicism in 1980s. Cultural materialism was coined by Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams used cultural materialism to describe a theoretical blending of leftist culturalism and Marxist analysis. Cultural materialist deals with specific historical documents and attempt to analyze and recreate the zeitgeist Zeitgeist of a particular moment in history. Raymond Williams viewed culture as a productive process. Cultural materialism identifies what he called residual, emergent, and oppositional cultural elements. Cultural materialists extend the class based analysis of traditional Marxism. They analyze the processes by which hegemonic forces in society appropriate canonical and historically important texts. It utilized them in an attempt to validate certain values on the cultural imagery. Cultural materialism's features are historical context, close textual analysis, political commitment, theoretical method, etc. Through cultural materialism's insistence on the importance of the issue of gender, sexuality, race, and class, cultural materialism impacts on literature. Cultural materialists followed Herbert Marcuse, Antonio Gramsci, Jonathan Dollimore, Alan Sinfield, Marvin Harris, These developed the cultural materialism. Cultural materialism is anthropological perspective of analyzing society. Cultural materialists identify three levels of social system. First, infrastructure. Second, structure. Third, superstructure. Raymond Williams says in his essay, Culture is Ordinary. He says in the essay, in the text, culture is ordinary. A culture is a whole way of life, and the arts are a part of a social organization which economic change clearly radically affects. There is a next term, that is cultural poetics. Cultural poetics is coined by S. Green, Stephen Greenblatt. It is known as New Historicism in America and cultural materialism in Britain. The purpose of cultural poetics is to discover the original ideology behind significant historical and biological facts about writer and resources. Cultural poetics based on Jim Harvey's speech structures. Greenblatt wrote essays collection titled Renaissance Cultural Poetics. Stephen Greenblatt defines cultural poetics in Shakespearean negotiations as the study of the collective making of distinct cultural practices and inquiry into the relations among these practices. There is another term related with cultural studies, ethnic studies. In US, it is interdisciplinary study of difference in race, ethnicity, nation, sexuality, gender, power expressed by state, civil society, individuals. Ethnic studies is an academic field in response to charges that traditional to humanities disciplines. Ethnic studies focuses question of representation, racialization, racial formation theory. There is a next term related with cultural studies, cultural hegemony. The Marxist philosopher Antonio Gramsci developed theory of cultural hegemony. We must keep in mind. There are some uh, terms related with cultural studies, such as cultural capital, comparative cultural studies, cultural industry, cultural imperialism, multiculturalism, cultural globalization. These terms also related with cultural studies. So here I want to take near a short break. We will continue. There are some schools who also belong to, who also deals with cultural studies. These schools such as Frankfurt School, feminism, post-colonialism. These schools played to develop a vital role for the developing of cultural studies. Frankfurt School is important school, and in Frankfurt School, there were some writers, some theorists such as Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall, Walter Benjamin, Antonio Gramsci. Yes, these theorists and thinkers belongs to a Frankfurt School. They also contributed. They contributed for the development of cultural studies. We have already studied, discussed Raymond Williams, Stuart Hall. Yes, but some concept also we must keep in our mind that Antonio Gramsci was presented key concepts such as hegemony, power and ideology, organic and traditional intellectuals. So that there is the next school feminism, which also that contributed for the development of cultural studies. In feminism, we find Mary Wollstonecraft, Simone de Beauvoir, yes, that Helen Sixos, Ellen Showalter, Judith Butler, Luce Irigaray, Julia Kristeva. These writers, theorists, contributed for the this feminism. After that, post-colonialism. Uh, Here in post-colonialism, Edward Said, Homike Baba, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak, uh, Fred Fanon, they they also contributed for the to post-colonialism school. Edward Said, we know very well. Homike Baba presented some concepts such as mimicry, hybridity, third space. In this way, find uh, culture studies, concept of culture studies, and all other things related studies. Yes. So I want to stop